all the stone tools and baskets, arrow points, arrow shafts, bows, cotton yarn, cotton and vine hammocks, clay pots, assorted other tools, various medicinal remedies, pets, food products, articles of clothing, and the like, you'd end up with a figure of around 300. Before 10,000 years ago, this was the approximate material wealth of every village on the planet. If our species is about 100,000 years old, then 90% of our history has been spent in the state of relative economic simplicity. I'm using the 100,000 figure as the lower boundary of the estimate between 100 and 160,000 for the last bottleneck migration out of Africa, from which all of us apparently come from. Living along the Hudson River that borders New York and New Jersey are the Manhattan people. Consumer traders whose average annual income has been estimated at $40,000 per person per year. If you walked into the Manhattan Village and counted up all the different products available at retail stores and restaurants, factory outlets, and superstores, you'd end up with a figure of around 10 billion, as measured in stock keeping units, SKUs, that marketers use. That the barcode system is now over 10 billion. They just had to add some more bars and digits to it to get it up to 100 billion, and eventually it'll be a trillion possible. This difference of 400 times in income and 33 million times in products almost beggars description. If ever there was a great leap forward, this was it. Comparable to the evolution of bipedalism, the big brain, and consciousness, equivalent to the invention of fire, the printing press, and the internet, and on par with the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, and the digital revolution. And the great leap forward did not happen gradually. It's been estimated that this $100 per person per year had risen only to about $150 per person per year by 1000 BCE, the end of the Bronze Age and the time of King David. It did not exceed $200 per person per year until after 1750 AD and the onset of the Industrial Revolution. In other words, it took 97,000 years to go from $100 to $150 per person per year, then another 2,750 years to climb to $200 per person per year. And finally, 250 years to ascend to today's level of $6,600 per person per year for the entire world. And as we just saw, an order of magnitude higher still for the wealthiest people in the richest nations. If we compress that 100,000-year period into just 1 year, then the last 250-year period of relative prosperity would represent less than 1 day out of the year. Or if we condense the 100 millennium into one 24-hour day, our epic of industrial production and market economies accounts for a mere 3.6 minutes. In other words, the age in which we live and take for granted as normal, in fact, constitutes a mere 1/4% of the history of humanity. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve. That's a really weird thing. What the world we live in is completely anomalous, and the reason it's weird and strange is how does all this happen? And so I try to answer that question coming at it from different sciences, beginning with complexity theory. So I'm arguing that the economy is a complex adaptive system that emerges out of simpler systems. From the bottom up, you don't need a top-down intelligent designer to make this happen for the same reason you don't need an intelligent designer for the other things we know about. For example, life appears to be a self-organized emergent property of prebiotic chemicals that came together in a manner that allowed them to be self-sustaining and capable of duplication and reproduction. However that happened, surface of the water, deep parts of the water, in the deep hot rocks, who knows. Complex life appears to be a self-organized emergent property of simpler life. The cells that we're made out of, eukaryotic cells, as you know, are made of simpler cells. This is Lynn Margulis's theory, that the reason mitochondrial, for example, have mitochondrial DNA, in which we can all track our ancestry through our maternal line, is probably because, I mean, what a weird thing if you think about that. Why would we have another set of DNA in our cells? We already have a full set of DNA in our cells. What's this other set there? Because that was originally a cell independent of our own. It was a prokaryotic cell, a simpler cell. This is Lynn's theory, and I think she's largely correct in that. And so this is an example of sort of a conglomeration, a coming together of simpler systems into more complex systems. Without design, without top-down instruction, just put energy into the system and it happens naturally. This is a property of nature, it appears. Multicellular life, the immune system appears to be a self-organized emergent property. Consciousness is probably best going to be explained as a self-organized emergent property of just hundreds of billions of neurons firing in patterns and sort of ratcheting up the scale from simpler to more complex to doing what we're doing now, whatever it is we're doing, thinking, talking, higher reasoning, relatively higher reasoning anyway. Language is obviously a self-organized emergent property. I mean, no one designed English 500 years ago to sound like this. If you try to read Beowulf in its original writing, it's impenetrable. And no one designed English to say, where I live in Southern California, where they use the word like every 3 words. That just spontaneously arises. The law is obviously the same thing, and so is the economy. So one of the things I'm trying to do in the book is sort of bridge building. I try to convince my conservative friends that, evolution, it's just like that free market thing that you already accept and should not have top-down design. And trying to convince my liberal friends that, that evolution stuff you fully accept and understand as a bottom-up emergent property. Well, the economy, the free market economy is a lot like that, perfectly like it. But anyway, that's one of the parallels I draw with that. And so starting with that then, I look at why it is that conservatives don't accept evolution and liberals don't accept free market economics. Now, that's not perfect, obviously, but there are certain generalizations there. And one reason is in chapter 2 I call folk economics, is that there's certain things about the world that we're not well equipped to understand intuitively on a natural level. I mentioned earlier our natural propensity to connect A to B. That's just learning. That's called association learning. And oftentimes A really is connected to B, and that's why we're good learners. All animals can do this. And the problem is we don't have a baloney detection module in our brain that can tell the difference between that can detect a false positive. That is, A looks like it's connected to B, but in fact it's not. And there's nothing in our brains designed to really be good at picking those false positives out. And so that's why, I have job security at Skeptic, I guess, because we'll always have weird things to investigate. And certainly this is the reason I think the best metaphor of this comes from Richard Dawkins, who has invented most of the great metaphors in science. And what he calls middle world, or what I prefer for alliterative reasons, middle land. That is, in the middle land in which we evolved in the plains of Africa, most things are sort of a middling size compared to us. So say in size, it range between like ants and mountain ranges. That's kind of our range of perspective of size. So things that are smaller than ants, like molecules and atoms and electrons and subatomic particles, there's nothing intuitive for us to grasp to understand that. The atom is like a solar system with the electrons going around the nucleus. Well, no, actually, it's not like that at all. But boy, it sure helps to have that simple 3D model. And that's why we struggle in the history of science to come up with the right metaphor, because on that scale or the other scale, size of planets, stars, galaxies, expanding bubble universes, multiple bubble universes, and so forth, there's nothing in our middle land world in which we can hook it into our brains and say, yes, I understand that now. So that's why much of science requires this constant education and vigilance and coming up with interesting metaphors to hook it onto something else. So in terms of understanding causality in biology, same problem. Our vast experience with designed objects is that they were designed by us. So naturally, when we see something that looks complex and designed, an eye, an arm, a wing looks like this was designed for flying, and let's be honest, it was. Evolution's the designer of wings and eyes, but our natural intuition is not to think of it that way, to think of, well, there must be somebody like me who's just a lot smarter that made this, something like that. So intuitively, we think intelligent designer, counterintuitively evolution, so it's harder. And then in this realm, the social realm, the economic realm, in our middle land world of the Paleolithic environment in which we evolved, there were no market economies. There was no disparity of wealth. There was very little division of labor. These were mostly egalitarian societies in which there's a mass redistribution of what little wealth there was. And when somebody was able to accumulate slightly more wealth, this usually caused considerable problems because, to be honest, probably, these were ill-gotten gains, most likely. And it's really only in the last maybe century or two where it's become possible to actually become wealthy in a relatively free and fair manner.